Hello, I'm the Daily Storyteller, and I'm here to keep you company today. If you've visited my channel before, welcome back. And if this is your first time, I'm so glad to welcome you to the world of stories. I know many of you use these videos to relax or to help fall asleep more easily. So get comfortable, let your body relax, and allow the gentle sound of rain in the background to wash away your stress and worries. In this video, you'll hear chilling stories, most of them based on true events, told with honesty and depth. If you enjoy this content, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Now then, let's begin. Story: The Man in the Shadows. It was a cold autumn evening when I first saw him. The sun had just set and the streets were bathed in the eerie glow of the streetlights. I had just finished my shift at the local bookstore and was walking home, my breath visible in the chill of the air. The quiet of the evening was almost comforting, the kind of silence that wraps around you, filling you with a sense of peace. But that peace didn't last long. As I walked down the street, something felt off. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I glanced around, but there was no one in sight. I told myself it was just the darkness playing tricks on my mind, the kind of paranoia that strikes when you've been working long hours and are tired. But then I saw him. A figure standing in the shadows of an alley just beyond the reach of the streetlight. At first, I thought it was just another passerby, someone waiting for the light to change or taking a shortcut through the alley. But as I drew closer, I realized something was wrong. He was watching me. He didn't move, didn't shift his position as I walked closer. His face was hidden in the darkness, but I could feel his gaze fixed on me, cold and calculating. I tried to dismiss it as nothing, but my heart began to race, the unease creeping up my spine. I quickened my pace, trying to ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. But as I passed the alley, I heard it, soft footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing behind me. I turned, half expecting to see someone just behind me, maybe someone walking in the same direction. But there was nothing. The street was empty, the alley dark and still. I told myself I was being ridiculous. There was no one there. I was just tired, my mind playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept walking, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread that seemed to follow me. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were getting closer, louder, matching my pace. I stopped abruptly, my heart thumping in my chest, and turned around once more. There he was. The Man in the Shadows. He was standing at the edge of the alley, a silhouette against the dark. His features were still hidden, but I could feel his presence. He was tall, unnaturally so, and his clothes were dark, blending into the night. His face was obscured by a hood, but I could feel his eyes on me, even from a distance. I took a step back, my mind racing. I should have kept walking, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. There was something about the way he stood, motionless, watching me with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. I took another step back, but that was when I heard his voice, a low, gravelly whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. "You shouldn't have turned around." The words sent a shock of cold through my entire body, and I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was chilling, but what terrified me the most was the fact that it was coming from him, the man in the shadows. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. My legs felt heavy, like I was running through thick mud, and I could hear his footsteps, now quick and urgent, following me, getting closer. My heart pounded in my chest, my thoughts racing, but all I could focus on was the sound of his pursuit, the echo of his steps growing louder with every passing second. I turned a corner, hoping to lose him, but when I looked over my shoulder, I saw him. He was still following me, still in the shadows, his dark figure moving swiftly through the alleyways, never once breaking pace. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment. I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it in a frantic panic, and pressed my back against it, gasping for breath. I was shaking, my hands slick with sweat. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure. He had been following me. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The image of the man in the shadows, the voice that echoed in my mind, the way he moved, so unnatural, so silent, it haunted me. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, that he was still out there, waiting for the right moment to come after me. I tried to push it out of my mind, tried to tell myself it was just a weird encounter, that I was overreacting. But no matter how hard I tried, the fear stayed with me. I couldn't go back to sleep. I stayed awake, staring at the walls of my apartment, listening for the slightest sound, the softest tap, the faintest whisper. The next day, I went to work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The man was out there somewhere, just waiting. Every time I glanced around, I expected to see him standing in the shadows, watching me. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle in the hallway made my heart skip a beat. I couldn't concentrate, I couldn't focus. Every time I turned a corner, I felt a rush of panic, the fear of seeing him again, of hearing that voice. But I didn't see him. Not that day, not the next. Days passed, and life went back to normal. Or so I thought. A week later, I was walking home again, late at night, when I saw him. He was standing at the same spot, just outside the alley, watching me with those cold, empty eyes. The same dark figure, the same stillness. This time I didn't wait for him to speak. I turned and ran without hesitation, my feet pounding against the pavement, my breath ragged in my chest. I ran faster than I had ever run before, my legs aching, my body screaming for rest, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let him catch me. The footsteps behind me were closer now, faster, echoing in the street like a drumbeat. I reached the entrance to my building, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking. I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it as quickly as I could. My heart was pounding in my chest, my body trembling with fear. I turned around to face the hallway and froze. There, at the end of the hall, was the man. His silhouette was barely visible in the dim light, but I could feel him, watching me, his gaze burning through the distance. I didn't know how he had followed me, how he had gotten inside, but I knew one thing. He wasn't just following me anymore. He was inside. Story. Sleepwalking into terror. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I first heard the footsteps. At first I thought it was just the usual sounds of the house settling, but as I listened more closely, the footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. They were soft at first, almost like a whisper against the wooden floors, but as they approached, I could hear them with perfect clarity. It sounded like someone was walking around the house, slowly, carefully, as if trying not to wake anyone, but I was wide awake. I turned over in bed, my heart pounding. It was strange, because I lived alone. There was no one else in the house. I should have been the only one awake, and yet here I was, lying in the dark, listening to the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway. I got out of bed, my feet cold against the floor, and tiptoed to my bedroom door. I creaked it open just enough to peek out, straining my ears to make out the source of the sound. The hallway was pitch black, save for the faint glow of the streetlights outside, shining through the small window at the end of the hall. I saw nothing. The footsteps continued. I stood there, frozen for what felt like an eternity, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I knew I had to check it out. I couldn't just ignore it, not when it sounded so close, so real. My mind raced through a million possibilities. Maybe it was a burglar, maybe a neighbor who had accidentally come into the wrong house. But when I stepped out into the hallway, I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. Standing at the end of the hallway, looking straight at me, was me. I blinked, trying to clear the fog in my mind. I could barely process what I was seeing. It was a mirror image of me, dressed in the same pajamas, hair the same way, but there was one difference. My doppelganger wasn't moving, and its eyes were wide open, unnaturally wide, almost unnervingly so, fixed on me with a cold, empty stare. My heart skipped a beat. I stumbled backward, slamming into the wall, my breath coming in shallow gasps. But then the figure, the thing that looked like me, turned around slowly, as if it hadn't even noticed my presence, and began to walk toward the stairs. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I watched, frozen, as it walked with slow, deliberate steps, just like before. I could hear its feet padding against the floorboards, moving downward, and I had no idea what to do. I followed quietly, unable to make a sound. My body was shaking, my heart hammering in my chest, and as I reached the top of the stairs, I saw it again, the figure standing in front of the door to the basement. It turned its head slightly, just enough to catch my eye, and then it pushed open the door. "Please, no," I whispered to myself, unable to stop my legs from moving forward. I watched it descend into the darkness of the basement, and without thinking, I followed. I don't know why I went down there. I should have turned and run back upstairs, but something inside of me, the same compulsion, the same strange pull that had brought me here in the first place, kept me moving. I descended slowly, step by step, the darkness pressing in on me. The only light came from the small bulb at the top of the stairs, casting long shadows that danced on the walls. When I reached the bottom, I looked around. The basement was cold and damp, the walls lined with old boxes and forgotten furniture. And there, in the middle of the room, was the figure. It stood in the center, motionless, its back to me. For a moment, I thought it might turn and face me again, but it didn't. It just stood there, breathing deeply, as if it was waiting for something. I walked closer, my mind racing, my body feeling heavier with every step. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. Something had me in its grip, pulling me forward, forcing me to get closer to that figure. And then it spoke. "Wake up." The voice was soft, almost like a whisper, but it rang in my ears like a thunderclap. I stopped in my tracks, my blood running cold. It was the voice of me. I recognized it immediately. It was my voice, but it wasn't. It was distorted, almost hollow, as if coming from a place far away, from somewhere deep inside the darkness itself. "Wake up," it repeated, a little louder this time. I felt my legs give way beneath me. I sank to my knees, my breath shallow and ragged. The air in the basement was thick, suffocating, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, thumping so loudly it drowned out everything else. I should have turned and run, but my body wouldn't obey. I was trapped in this nightmarish scenario, unable to escape. The figure in front of me started to turn, slowly, its head tilting to one side, and for the first time I saw its eyes. They were wide open, unblinking, staring at me with that same cold, hollow gaze. "You've been asleep for far too long," it said, its voice chilling, as though it was speaking from the depths of some dark abyss. "Wake up." The words rang in my mind over and over like a chant. I felt a strange pressure in my head, like something was trying to break through, trying to wake me up from some deep sleep I didn't remember falling into. The darkness around me seemed to shift, to breathe, like the very walls of the basement were alive. The air was thick with something ancient, something that had been waiting. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes again, I was no longer in the basement. I was in my bedroom, lying in bed, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked around, disoriented, unsure of what had just happened. I thought it was all a dream, but as I sat up, something caught my eye. My bedroom door was wide open. I could hear faint footsteps coming from the hallway, slow, deliberate. I froze, unable to move, my mind racing. And then, from the darkness outside my room, I heard it again. "Wake up." The voice was unmistakable now. It was my own voice calling out to me from the other side of the door. I stood up slowly, my body trembling, and reached for the doorknob. But before I could open it, the door slammed shut on its own, trapping me inside. I tried to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. I could hear the footsteps getting closer, the heavy thud of each step pounding through the door. "Wake up!" the voice repeated, now louder, more urgent. I didn't know what was happening anymore. I didn't know what reality was anymore. I backed away from the door, but it felt like the walls were closing in, suffocating me. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. For a moment, I thought it was over. I thought I was free. But when I turned to look at my reflection in the mirror, I saw it. My eyes. They were wide open, but they were empty, hollow. And behind them, in the darkness of my own reflection, I saw something move. Something that wasn't me. Story. The creeping fear. I had always been a fan of the quiet, the peace that comes with solitude. I liked the idea of living in a secluded little house on the outskirts of town, far away from the noise and chaos of everyday life. So when I found a small cottage nestled in the woods, I knew it was the perfect place for me. The cottage was old but well maintained, with ivy growing up the stone walls and a small porch that looked out over the forest. The owners had been kind enough to leave it furnished, and the interior was charming, rustic, but comfortable. I moved in quickly, eager to embrace the solitude and enjoy the fresh air and beauty of the surrounding woods. For the first few days, everything was perfect. I spent my time exploring the woods, taking long walks through the trees and soaking in the silence. But there was something strange about the place, a feeling that lingered in the back of my mind, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The air always felt heavier here, thicker, as if something was watching me. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was simply adjusting to the new environment. But then I started hearing things. At first, it was just small noises, footsteps, soft rustling in the leaves, the creak of the floorboards at night. I brushed it off, thinking it was the wind, or perhaps an animal outside. But as the days passed, the noises grew louder, more frequent. I could hear something, or someone, moving around the house at night. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the house settling, the old wooden beams creaking under the weight of time. But then, one night I heard it clearly. A knock. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but then it came again, louder this time, persistent. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Who could be at the door at this hour? I hadn't seen anyone for days. I stood still, listening, my pulse racing. The knock came again, and then a voice, low, barely audible, whispered through the door. "Let me in." I backed away slowly, my breath shallow and quick. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what was happening. There was no one out there, I told myself. It was just a figment of my imagination. But then the voice came again, louder this time, with a sense of urgency. "Let me in! You can't hide from me!" I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed the number for the local police. But just as I pressed the call button, the door rattled violently, shaking on its hinges. I jumped back, my heart thudding in my chest. The voice outside was now a growl, a deep guttural sound that sent chills through my entire body. "Let me in!" I ran to the back door, slamming it shut and locking it. My breath came in ragged gasps, my mind spiraling with panic. What was happening? Who was out there? The air around me felt thick, suffocating, and the walls of the house seemed to close in. I could hear the knocking continuing, moving from door to door, as if whatever it was, whatever they were, was circling the house, looking for a way inside. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and ran out the back door, fleeing into the woods, not daring to look back. The trees were dark and twisted, the shadows thick with the weight of something unseen. The knocking and growling faded into the distance, but the fear stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. I didn't stop running until I reached the small town, and when I finally made it to the police station, I was trembling, barely able to speak. I told them everything about the knocking, the voice, and the fear that had gripped me. But when they sent officers to the house, they found nothing, no signs of anyone being there, no evidence of any disturbance. It was as if the house had been empty the whole time. I tried to return to the cottage, but I couldn't. Every time I neared it, the fear would rise in my chest, choking me, and I would turn around, running in the opposite direction. I knew I couldn't go back there. Not after what happened. Not after what I heard. Weeks passed, and life in the town slowly returned to normal. But I could never shake the feeling that something was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me. The fear clung to me like a second skin, following me wherever I went, haunting my every thought. It wasn't until one rainy evening that I finally returned to the cottage. I told myself I had to face my fear, that I couldn't let whatever happened control my life. But as I walked up the path to the front door, I felt that same thick, suffocating presence, like something was watching me from the windows, from the trees. The house was silent, as it had always been, but the air was heavy, as if it had absorbed the fear I had left behind. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was exactly as I had left it, everything in its place, undisturbed. I tried to calm my breathing, telling myself that I was being paranoid, that there was nothing to fear. But as I walked through the rooms, I felt it again, the weight of something unseen, something that didn't belong. I moved toward the kitchen when I noticed something strange, a small object on the floor, half hidden beneath the rug. I bent down to pick it up, my fingers trembling as I touched it. It was a small piece of paper, folded neatly. I unfolded it slowly, and my stomach dropped as I read the words written inside. "You shouldn't have come back." The handwriting was messy, almost frantic, like it had been written in a hurry. I froze, my blood running cold. I looked around the kitchen, feeling the walls close in around me. There was no one else in the house, no sign of anyone being there. But that note was enough to confirm my worst fear. I wasn't alone. The house wasn't just haunted by memories or shadows. It was haunted by something far darker, something that had been waiting for me. And it was no longer just in the shadows. It was inside me, in my mind, in my soul. It had followed me back, just as it had followed me out before. As I stood there in the kitchen, I heard it again. The footsteps. Slow and deliberate, the unmistakable sound of someone or something walking toward me from the hallway. I turned, but there was no one there. The darkness was closing in. I tried to run, but the walls seemed to shift, bending and twisting, and I couldn't find my way out. The shadows seemed to rise up, reaching for me, pulling me back into the very heart of the house, where the fear was most alive. I could hear it now, clearer than ever before. The voice. "You should have stayed away." And then the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. Story. The Haunted Ones. It was late one night when I first encountered the thing that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I had just moved into a new apartment, an old building that had been around for decades. The landlord told me the building had a history, but he said it with such a nonchalant tone that I didn't think much of it. "Lots of people have lived here over the years," he said. "Some say the place has a bit of character. Nothing to worry about." At first I was glad to be living alone again. I had just broken up with my longtime partner and needed a fresh start. The apartment was perfect for that. Cheap, with high ceilings and a vintage feel. The floors creaked in that familiar, comforting way, and the windows opened wide to let in the fresh air. It was quiet, peaceful, and felt like it could be my sanctuary. But as the days passed, I started to notice things, small, subtle things that made my skin crawl. The shadows in the corners of the rooms seemed darker than they should be, and I would sometimes catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to find nothing there. Objects would shift slightly when I wasn't looking. Things would go missing, only to reappear in the most unexpected places. At first, I chalked it up to my imagination, to the stress of adjusting to a new environment. But that changed one night when I was sitting on the couch reading a book. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the lamp beside me. The air was still and all was quiet in the apartment. But then I heard it. A whisper. At first I thought it was the wind, or maybe the sound of something from the building next door. But the whisper came again, closer this time, like someone was standing just behind me. I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. I turned slowly, but there was no one there. "Did I imagine that?" I whispered to myself, but my pulse quickened, the unease spreading through my chest like wildfire. I tried to shake it off and return to my book, but I couldn't. Something felt wrong, like the air in the room was thickening, pressing against me. I set the book down, my heart pounding in my chest, and began to scan the room. Nothing, just the same familiar furniture, the same shadows that I had grown accustomed to. But that feeling, the feeling that I wasn't alone, was growing stronger. I stood up, walking slowly to the window to check outside. It was late, the streetlights casting long shadows across the street, but nothing seemed unusual, and then I heard it again. This time it was louder, more insistent. "Help me!" The voice was low and hoarse, like it was coming from deep within the walls. My blood ran cold. I froze in place, unable to move, unable to breathe. The voice was clear now, and the words chilled me to the bone. I didn't know what to do. I ran to the door and flung it open, stepping into the hallway. The apartment building was quiet. The other tenants' doors closed, their apartments silent. But something felt off. The hallway stretched on too long, the darkness at the end of it thicker than it should have been. I turned to look at the walls again, expecting to see something, or someone, lurking in the shadows. But again, there was nothing. Just the cold, unfeeling plaster, the same silence that had filled the apartment before. I slammed the door behind me and locked it. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the room with me, something was waiting. The following days were filled with the same creeping sense of dread. It wasn't just at night anymore. I could feel it during the day, when I was at home alone, when I was trying to relax. The whispers would come again, soft and barely audible, but unmistakable. They seemed to be coming from the walls, the floorboards, the very air itself. I tried to tell myself it was just stress, that I was hearing things, but deep down I knew something was wrong. One evening I decided to take a walk, hoping that the fresh air would clear my mind. As I walked down the street, I noticed something strange. There was a man standing outside the building, staring up at my apartment window. His face was shadowed by the brim of his hat, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching. I stopped for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I had never seen this man before, but something about him made my stomach churn. I quickened my pace, turning the corner to get away from him. But when I looked back, he was still standing there, unmoving, his gaze fixed on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for me to come back. I returned to the building later that evening, my thoughts heavy with the strange encounter. The hallway seemed darker now, the shadows growing longer, thicker. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, expecting to see something or someone lurking just out of sight. When I reached my door, I hesitated for a moment, the weight of the air in the building pressing down on me. I slowly unlocked the door and stepped inside, only to find the apartment colder than it should have been. The faint smell of something old and musty filled the air, and the whispers started up again, louder this time, more insistent. "Come closer." I turned to the window, my heart in my throat, and that's when I saw it. Something moving in the reflection. A figure, standing in the shadows at the edge of the room. Its shape was distorted, almost ghost-like, its features hidden in the dark. But I could see the faint outline of a face, pale and distorted, watching me with hollow eyes. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure in the reflection didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me. The whispers grew louder. "You're one of us now." I turned away, my hands shaking, and ran to the door. But before I could open it, I heard something behind me. A soft, deliberate creak of the floorboards. I didn't need to turn around to know. It was there. It was close. I opened the door and fled into the hallway, my heart racing, my mind spiraling. But as I reached the stairwell, I stopped short. The man, the same man I had seen outside earlier, was standing at the top of the stairs. His face was still hidden beneath the brim of his hat. But now I could see something else, something that made my blood run cold. His eyes were hollow, empty. "You can't leave," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. I tried to scream, but the words stuck in my throat. I was paralyzed, my body refusing to move. And then, without warning, the door to my apartment slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the hallway. I turned, desperately searching for a way out, but the hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in around me. The whispers were back, louder now, filling my head, drowning out everything else. I knew then that I was never going to escape. The house? No. The building was alive, and it had claimed me. And the man in the shadows wasn't the only thing haunting me. Story beneath the surface. I had always heard rumors about the old lake on the edge of town, the one that nobody visited, the one that was shrouded in mystery. The locals would talk about it in hushed tones, warning outsiders to stay away, to avoid the water. "There's something beneath the surface," they'd say, as if they knew something more than just the old stories. But I didn't believe it. I never did. It wasn't until that fateful summer that I realized I had been wrong. I had just turned 20, and like most young adults, I was eager for adventure, eager to explore the world around me. So when a few of my friends suggested we take a trip to the lake, I was more than willing. The weather had been unusually warm, and the idea of spending the day in the cool waters seemed like a perfect escape from the heat. The drive to the lake was uneventful, the air thick with the scent of pine and the hum of the engine. We chatted, joked around, and laughed about the tales we had all heard growing up. The lake wasn't far from the town, but it was secluded, hidden deep in the forest, and there was something about it that always made me uneasy. It was too quiet, too still. As we arrived at the lake, I couldn't help but notice how unnaturally calm the water was. There were no ripples, no movement, just the perfect mirror of the sky above. The trees surrounding the lake stood tall and silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, but everything else felt still, as though the entire world had come to a halt. We set up our spot near the edge of the water, spreading out towels and unpacking our bags. I tried to shake the unease that had settled in my chest, but it clung to me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. "We should go for a swim," one of my friends suggested, his voice cheerful, trying to break the tension. He was always the daring one, always the first to dive in without thinking. I hesitated. "I don't know. It just feels off, like something's wrong." "Oh, come on, don't be a baby," another friend teased. "It's just a lake." What's the worst that could happen? I knew they were right. I was just being paranoid, I told myself. It was just an old legend, a story told to scare kids. There was no reason to believe any of it, so reluctantly I agreed. The water was colder than I had expected, sending a shock through my body as I waded in. The lake was deep, dark, and felt endless, like it went on forever beneath the surface. But as we swam farther out, I began to notice something strange. The water, though clear, seemed to have a weight to it, like something was pulling at me from beneath. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling grew stronger. As I swam further from the shore, I glanced down into the water and saw something moving beneath me, something large, something dark. My heart skipped a beat. It was just a fish, I thought, just a shadow of something swimming by. But when I looked again, it was closer, much closer, and it wasn't a fish. It was something else, something unnatural. I felt a sharp tug on my leg, as if something below the surface had grabbed hold of me. I gasped and kicked, but the pull only intensified, as if something was dragging me down. Panic surged through me. I thrashed in the water, trying to free myself, but the force beneath me was too strong. "Help!" I screamed, my voice barely audible over the roar of the water in my ears. "Get me out!" My friends rushed toward me, but I could see the fear in their eyes, the panic as they realized I wasn't the only one feeling the pull. Something was in the water, something alive, and it was not letting go. But just as suddenly as it had begun, the pull stopped. The water released me, and I was able to break free, gasping for air, my heart racing. I swam as fast as I could toward the shore, the feeling of something following me just beneath the surface, never leaving my mind. When I reached the shore, I collapsed onto the sand, my body trembling with fear. "What was that?" I gasped, my voice shaking. "I don't know," one of my friends said, his face pale. "But I don't think we're supposed to be here." We gathered our things quickly, no longer caring about the fun day we had planned. We didn't speak much as we left, The only sounds the rush of our footsteps and the eerie silence of the forest around us. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dark shapes moving beneath the surface of the lake, felt the cold tug on my legs. I tried to convince myself it was just a freak accident, that the lake was harmless, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. There was something beneath that water, something ancient, something that had been waiting for us to come too close. The next few days passed in a haze. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at the lake. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just a freak occurrence, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that something wasn't right. My friends and I hadn't talked about it much after we left, but I could see the fear in their eyes too. None of us had been the same since that day. I tried to push it out of my mind, but the dream started. Night after night, I dreamed of the lake. In my dreams, I would swim out into the water, feeling the same pull, the same dark force dragging me under. But in these dreams, I would sink deeper and deeper, and when I looked down into the depths, I would see it. A massive, monstrous shape, its eyes glowing from the dark, watching me, waiting for me. It wasn't just a nightmare, it felt real. And the longer I ignored it, the more it began to invade my waking life. I went to the town library searching for answers. I dug through old records and town history books, looking for any mention of the lake, any stories that could explain what had happened. But there was nothing, no mention of anything unusual, no legends, nothing that would explain what I had felt. But then, buried deep in an old, tattered journal, I found something. It was a personal account, written by a man named Thomas Blackwell, dated back to the late 1800s. He had written about the lake and the strange occurrences he had witnessed during his time living near it. In his journal, Thomas described a creature, something ancient, something that lived in the depths of the lake. He wrote of strange sounds, of disappearances, and of a presence that haunted the waters, a presence that drew people in and never let them go. "Beware the lake," he wrote, his handwriting frantic, "for what lies beneath is not for man to understand. It is ancient and it will wait for you, and when it calls, you must never answer." I slammed the book shut, my hands trembling. I knew then that whatever I had felt that day, whatever had pulled me into the water, was not something that could be explained. There was something beneath that surface, something alive, waiting, and now it had noticed me. I could feel it, even now. Watching, waiting, and I knew I would never be able to escape it. Story. Eyes in the dark. The night I first saw them, I thought I was imagining it. It was the middle of a stormy evening, the kind where the wind howls through the trees and the rain falls in sheets. I was alone in my apartment, curled up with a book and a cup of tea, trying to enjoy the quiet. The city outside was nothing but a blur of lights through the rain-smeared windows, and the sound of the storm seemed to dull everything, wrapping the room in a thick, almost tangible silence. But then I heard it, the faintest sound, like a scratching at the window. It was soft at first, almost like the wind, but then it grew louder, more distinct. I hesitated for a moment, telling myself it was just the storm, but something in me, the part of me that had been taught to trust my instincts, knew it wasn't the wind. I got up and walked to the window, peering out into the night. The storm had whipped the trees into a frenzy, their branches twisting and turning in the gale. But there was nothing unusual, no one standing out there. Just the storm, howling through the night. I turned away, shaking my head. I was being paranoid. My mind was playing tricks on me, that's all. But just as I was about to sit back down, I heard it again. The same scratching, only this time it was louder, more urgent. I turned back toward the window, my heart racing. This time I couldn't ignore it. Something was out there, something that didn't belong. Slowly, I approached the window again, my fingers trembling as I reached out to pull the blinds open. And that's when I saw them. 2 eyes, pale and glowing, staring at me from the darkness. They were impossibly bright, piercing through the storm, locked onto mine with an intensity that made my blood run cold. They were too large to be human, too unnatural. And they didn't blink. They didn't move. They just watched me, unmoving, as if waiting for me to make the first move. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I should have screamed, I should have run, but all I could do was stare. Those eyes were not just a reflection of the storm, they were real. I could see them, see the way they gleamed with a malevolent energy, a hunger that sent shivers down my spine. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they disappeared. The eyes vanished into the dark, leaving nothing behind but the storm and the empty night. I was left standing there, my hands still gripping the blinds, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just seen. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't explain it. The storm raged outside, and yet the room felt colder than it had before, as though the air had thickened with something unnatural. I backed away from the window, my mind a whirl of confusion and fear. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light or the wind playing with my mind. But deep down I knew it wasn't it. Whatever I had seen outside those windows wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real, and I had no idea what it wanted. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes burning into me from the darkness. I could hear the scratching against the window, faint but persistent, like something was trying to get in. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the fear lingered, gnawing at my thoughts, pulling me into a restless, nightmare-filled sleep. The next day, I tried to forget about it. I told myself it was just the storm, that I had been tired and overstressed. But when I walked out into the hallway, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Fresh scratch marks on the wall near the window, as if something had clawed at it in desperation. I reached out to touch the marks, and a chill ran through my body. They were still wet, as if they had been made just hours before. I wasn't imagining things, and whatever had been outside that window wasn't gone. Over the next few days, the scratching continued. At night, I would hear it again, softer at first, like the wind scraping against the window, but then growing louder, more distinct, more urgent. It was as if whatever was out there was getting closer, trying to make its presence known. I tried everything to ignore it, to convince myself that it was just the storm, just my imagination. But I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me. I felt its eyes on me, even when I wasn't looking out the window, even when I was in another room. And then one evening, just as I was settling in for the night, I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't a regular knock. It was slow, deliberate, as if whoever was on the other side was savoring the moment. I froze, my pulse racing. I hadn't been expecting anyone. Who could be out there at this hour? I crept to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. I peered through the peephole, my heart in my throat. There was no one there. But the knocking continued, softer now, as though the person, or thing, was waiting for me to open the door. I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I backed away slowly, my thoughts spinning out of control. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, the sound vibrating through the door as if it were trying to break through. I ran to the window and pulled the blinds open, expecting to see those same eyes staring at me from the darkness. But this time, there was nothing. The street was empty, just the rain falling in sheets, the street lights flickering in the distance. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, but the feeling of dread didn't go away. It had only gotten worse. I turned away from the window, my mind a blur of panic. And that's when I saw it. In the reflection of the window, I saw the faint outline of something, or someone, standing behind me. My heart stopped. The figure was tall, its features obscured in shadow, but its eyes, I could see them. Those same glowing, unblinking eyes fixed on me through the reflection. I spun around, but no one was there. The eyes, though, stayed with me. They were in my mind now, in every dark corner, every shadow. They followed me wherever I went. They were waiting. I tried to leave the apartment. I packed my things and called a friend to come pick me up. But when I stepped outside, there was only silence. The street was empty, just the howling wind and the dark sky above. But I felt it. The eyes were still there, somewhere in the distance, watching. And as I drove away, the only thing that kept echoing in my head was the whisper, soft and cold, like the wind itself. You can't run. We're always watching. I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see them again, but there was nothing. Just the road ahead, the night stretching on, and the darkness that was never far behind. Story: The Haunting of Hollow Creek. Hollow Creek was never a place I had intended to visit. It was the kind of town that people avoided, one of those forgotten places where the past seemed to linger in the air, like a bad memory that wouldn't let go. It wasn't on any tourist map, and most people who had lived there spoke of it in whispers. But when my car broke down one fateful evening, it became my only option. I had been driving along a winding highway, caught in a downpour, when the engine sputtered and died. I pulled over to the side of the road, cursing under my breath. The rain wasn't letting up, and the sky was so dark, it seemed as if night had come early. I checked the map, trying to find the nearest town, and saw Hollow Creek listed about 10 miles away. It was the only place within driving distance, and with the rain showing no signs of stopping, I decided to make the trek on foot. The town was eerily quiet when I arrived, the streets empty, not a soul in sight. The old houses along the main street looked abandoned, their windows boarded up and the buildings crumbling as though the place had been forgotten by time. I passed a few houses with lights flickering through cracks in the boarded windows, but no one greeted me as I walked through the wet, silent streets. The air smelled of damp earth and rot, the scent of decay hanging heavily in the atmosphere. I found an old motel at the far end of the street, its neon sign flickering weakly in the rain. Desperate for shelter, I knocked on the door. The sound of footsteps approached, and an elderly woman opened the door, her face drawn and pale, her eyes dim but alert. "You need a room?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I nodded, trying to smile. "Just for the night." She stepped aside and let me in. The motel's interior was old, the floors creaking with every step, the wallpaper peeling off the walls. It looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades. As she handed me the key, she said, "Room 6. It's the last one available." "Thanks," I said, but she didn't respond. Instead, she just stared at me, her gaze lingering a little too long, almost as if she were trying to figure something out. I walked to my room, the hall filled with the musty smell of age and dust. Room 6 was at the end of the hall, tucked away behind an old wooden door. I unlocked it, entered, and immediately felt the temperature drop. The air inside was cold, the room dimly lit by a single lamp on the bedside table. The sheets on the bed were old and worn, and the furniture had seen better days. I dropped my bag onto the bed and went to the bathroom to freshen up. The mirror above the sink was cracked, and the water pressure in the shower was weak, but I didn't mind. I just needed to rest. But as I stood in front of the mirror, wiping my face, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow. It moved quickly, just beyond the edge of the mirror. My heart skipped a beat, and I turned around, expecting to see someone standing behind me. But the bathroom was empty, the shower curtains swaying gently as if disturbed by a breeze, though there was no wind. I told myself I was imagining things. It had been a long day, the storm had rattled my nerves, and the isolation of the town was starting to get to me. I finished getting ready and laid down on the bed, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest. But just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard a sound, a soft tapping, like a fingernail tapping against the glass. I sat up, listening intently. The room was still, the only sound the hum of the air conditioning unit. But then it came again, louder this time, as if someone was tapping on the window. I turned toward it, my eyes darting to the rain-soaked window. There was nothing outside. I breathed a sigh of relief and lay back down. I must have been imagining things, but the tapping continued. It grew louder, more insistent, as if someone was trying to get my attention. I stood up, walked to the window, and pulled back the curtains. I looked out into the rain, but there was no one there. Just the empty street, the occasional flicker of light from the distant houses, and the endless downpour. Confused, I stepped away from the window and sat back down on the bed. That's when I saw it, movement in the corner of the room. At first it was a shadow, a fleeting figure that seemed to shift in the darkness. Then it grew clearer, more distinct, a tall figure, its features hidden by the darkness, but its presence unmistakable. I froze, my body stiff with fear. I couldn't move. The figure seemed to grow larger, more imposing, as it approached the bed, and I could feel the temperature in the room drop even further. The air turned heavy, like I was being suffocated by the weight of something unseen, something ancient. The figure stopped at the foot of the bed, and in the dim light I could make out a faint outline of a face that was pale, gaunt, its eyes hollow and black, like deep wells of emptiness. It raised a hand slowly, pointing at me, and then it whispered, "You should never have come here." I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed, unable to move or make a sound. The figure in front of me seemed to grow, its form becoming more solid, more real. The darkness around it seemed to pulse, as if it were alive, feeding off my fear. I couldn't tear my eyes away from its face, from the black voids where its eyes should have been. "You don't belong here," it whispered again, its voice like a cold wind, a distant echo that vibrated through my bones. "This place is cursed." I felt the room close in on me, the walls tightening, the air growing colder. The figure slowly reached out, its fingers stretching toward me, and I could hear the faint sound of its breath, a low, rasping noise, like wind passing through dry leaves. The fingers came closer, and I couldn't stop myself from backing away. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. I was frozen, trapped in place by some unseen force. Suddenly the figure's hand reached out and touched the bedpost. A crackling sound filled the room, like electricity coursing through the air, and the room seemed to flicker in and out of existence, as if reality itself was warping. The figure spoke again, louder this time, its voice shaking the very air around me. "You are here because you are meant to be. You will never leave Hollow Creek." The lights in the room went out, and I was plunged into darkness. I could still hear the figure moving, its presence looming over me like a storm cloud. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel my legs giving out beneath me. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, and then the silence. The darkness seemed to swallow everything around me, and when I finally opened my eyes, the figure was gone. The room was empty. The bed was empty. Everything was as it should have been. But I knew deep down that it wasn't. Whatever had been in that room, whatever I had seen, was still there, waiting for me to let my guard down. I ran out of the room, grabbing my things and bolting for the door. The motel was silent, empty, as if everyone else had vanished. I ran through the hallway, desperate to leave, desperate to escape. But as I reached the front door, I froze. The door was locked. The same figure I had seen earlier stood in front of it, blocking my escape. Its hollow eyes met mine again, and it whispered one final sentence. "Welcome to Hollow Creek. Story. Screams in the night." I'll never forget that night. It was the first time I truly understood what people meant when they spoke of real terror. I had just moved into my new apartment in an older building, one that had seen better days. The landlord assured me that the place was quiet and peaceful, that nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened there. But from the moment I set foot in the building, I felt a strange, unsettling energy in the air, like the place itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The apartment was old, the floors creaking under my weight, the walls thin and papered with decades of paint that had started to peel. But it had character, and at the time I didn't mind the imperfections. It was cheap, and I was desperate for a fresh start after a messy breakup. The first few nights were quiet. I unpacked my things, settled into my routine, and tried to ignore the feeling of being watched. The apartment, despite its charm, felt off. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination. But that was before the screaming started. It was the middle of the night when I first heard it. At first it was faint, distant, like the sound of a woman crying in the distance. I thought maybe it was coming from outside, from the street below, or perhaps the thin walls of the building were allowing the sound from neighboring apartments to bleed through. But then the crying grew louder, more frantic, more anguished. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The sound was so real, so raw. I thought about going to the hallway to ask the neighbors if they'd heard it, but a part of me was afraid to leave my room. It felt like the noise was coming from within the building, from the very walls themselves. I tried to drown out the sound by turning on the TV, but it didn't help. The crying was constant, growing more desperate with each passing minute, and then it changed. The cry turned into a scream, a blood-curdling, guttural scream that sent a chill straight through my spine. It wasn't a scream of pain, it wasn't a scream of fear, it was something else, something primal, something ancient. I could feel it vibrating in my chest, the sound so real it was as if it were happening right in front of me. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window, looking out into the street below. There was nothing. No one. The street was empty, the only light coming from the street lamps that flickered in the fog. I could still hear the scream though, louder now, as if it was right outside my window. I backed away from the window, terrified, and then froze. There, in the reflection of the glass, I saw something moving behind me. It was a shadow, dark and tall, moving across the floor of my apartment. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing. Nothing but the quiet darkness and the stillness of the room. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that I was tired, that the stress of moving had finally caught up with me. But deep down, I knew there was something wrong with this place, something I couldn't explain. The scream continued to echo through the apartment, and I felt myself growing weaker, paralyzed by the fear that clawed at my insides. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, and every part of me wanted to run, to leave, to never come back. But for some reason, I couldn't. It was as if something was holding me there, trapping me in this place of terror. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the scream stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there in the middle of my apartment, my heart racing in my chest, my body frozen with fear. And then, in the deepest silence, I heard it, the whisper, "Help me." The whisper was faint, so faint that I almost thought I had imagined it. But then it came again, clearer this time. "Help me!" It was coming from the walls, from behind the very plaster that separated me from the unknown. I stumbled backward, my pulse racing, my breath shallow. I couldn't think, couldn't move. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I felt the room grow colder, the air thicker, as if someone was closing in on me. Suddenly, the light in the hallway flickered. I glanced toward the door, my mind racing. There was no one outside, I knew that. I hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't heard any movement. But the light, it flickered again, and then it went out entirely, leaving me in complete darkness. I stood there, frozen in the blackness, my eyes straining to adjust. The fear was suffocating, clawing at my insides, telling me to run, to get out of the apartment, to never look back. But I couldn't move. I was trapped. And then I saw it. A figure, standing in the middle of the room. It was tall, its shape shifting and blurry in the darkness. But the one thing I could see clearly were its eyes. Those eyes. They were hollow, black voids, empty and cold, yet they seemed to burn into me with an intensity I had never felt before. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. I couldn't speak. I couldn't scream. The air around me was thick with a presence that wasn't mine, that didn't belong here. And I knew without a doubt that I wasn't alone. The figure reached out a hand, its fingers elongated, its skin pale and slick. I could hear its breathing, ragged and deep, like something that had been hiding in the darkness for too long. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything to escape the suffocating terror, but my body wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by a fear deeper than anything I had ever experienced. The figure took a step forward, its shadow stretching across the room. I could feel it drawing closer, feel the air grow colder with each movement. The floor creaked under its weight, and I heard it speak, its voice low and gravelly. "You can't escape me." I tried to back away, but my legs were stiff, my body refusing to move. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. The thing, the presence, was so close now that I could feel its coldness, like a chill that cut through my skin, straight into my bones. It leaned closer, its face coming into view, and for the first time I saw it clearly. The face was twisted, like something unnatural, something that had never been human. The eyes were wide open, black as pitch, and the mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin, stretching too far for it to be natural. And then, in that same cold whisper, it spoke again. "Help me." The voice was unmistakably human. In that instant, the light flickered back on, blinding me with its sudden brightness. I gasped, stumbling backward, and when I opened my eyes, the figure was gone. The room was empty, the silence oppressive and thick. I collapsed to my knees, unable to breathe, unable to process what had just happened. The darkness was gone, but the terror remained. I looked around the room, my heart still pounding, but I was alone. Or so I thought. As I stood up, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me I had to answer. I pressed it to my ear, my hand shaking, and heard a voice I knew all too well. "Help me," the voice whispered. It was my own voice. Story. The shadow that follows. I had always believed that nothing could truly haunt you unless you let it. Ghost stories, shadowy figures, and unexplained occurrences, they were all just fables meant to entertain. At least that's what I thought, until I met it. It all started with a simple move. I had just finished college and decided to relocate to a new city to start fresh. I found a modest apartment on the outskirts of town, nestled between towering buildings that blocked out most of the sunlight. It was quiet, calm, and the rent was cheap, which was exactly what I needed. The apartment itself was older, with creaky floors and an ancient elevator that I made sure to avoid. It had character, or so I told myself. In the beginning, everything was perfect. I spent the first few weeks unpacking, setting up my new life, and enjoying the peace of solitude. But as the days passed, I began to notice something odd. It wasn't anything loud or noticeable at first, just the occasional flicker of a light or the faintest sound of footsteps behind me when no one was there. I thought I was imagining things. After all, I was adjusting to a new life in a new place. But then, it happened again. This time the footsteps were louder, more distinct, and they seemed to follow me from room to room. I'd turn a corner and hear them behind me, getting closer, but when I'd look around there was nothing there. I started locking the doors at night, pulling the blinds, trying to convince myself I was just tired or stressed. But the feeling remained. Something, or someone, was in the apartment with me. I felt it, like an invisible presence lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, watching me. One night, I woke up to the sound of my door creaking open. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest, and listened. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I heard it again, the soft sound of the door opening, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps. I should have called the police, but I was paralyzed with fear. I pulled the blankets over my head, hoping to hide from whatever was in the room with me, but the footsteps didn't stop. They grew louder, closer, until they stopped at the foot of my bed. I stayed completely still, my breath caught in my throat, not daring to make a sound. And then, from the darkness, I heard it, a voice, soft, low, and almost soothing. "I'm here." I felt a chill run down my spine. The voice didn't sound like anyone I knew, but it felt too familiar, too close. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I couldn't move. The weight of the air in the room seemed to press against me, suffocating me with an unseen force. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the footsteps stopped. The voice was gone. The air cleared, and I was left in the silence, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I convinced myself that I had been dreaming, that my mind had played tricks on me in my sleep. I told myself I was just exhausted, adjusting to the new environment, and that the noises were simply part of the old building settling. But that didn't explain the shadow. It started as a flicker in the corner of my eye. At first it was small, barely noticeable, a dark figure moving at the edge of my vision. I would turn quickly to catch a glimpse, but there was never anything there. It was like watching the shadow of something that was there, but invisible to the naked eye. But then it started to grow. One night, I was sitting in the living room, reading, when I saw it again. This time, it wasn't just a flicker. The shadow was large, stretched across the far wall, moving like it had a mind of its own. I froze, staring at it, my breath caught in my throat. The shadow twisted and stretched, its shape undulating as if it was alive. It seemed to inch closer, moving toward me slowly, deliberately. I stood up, but the shadow followed. No matter where I went in the room, it stayed with me, creeping along the walls, slithering like something out of a nightmare. My heart raced, panic rising in my chest, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I ran. I bolted down the hallway, into the bedroom, and slammed the door behind me. My mind was in overdrive, the pounding in my head growing louder as I sank to the floor. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block out the images, the thoughts that were racing through my mind. I looked around the room, half expecting to see the shadow in the corner, waiting. But there was nothing. The room was empty. I didn't feel safe, though. The feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond my vision, never left me. It followed me, just like the shadow, like it was waiting for the right moment to show itself again. The next few days passed in a blur. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling grew stronger, more oppressive. The shadows grew darker, thicker, and I felt them closing in on me. I could no longer walk through the apartment without glancing over my shoulder, afraid of what might be lurking in the corners of the room. And then, one night, it happened again. I was in bed, lying still, trying to sleep when I saw it, the shadow. It stood in the doorway, a dark, imposing figure, tall and thin, its shape shifting in the dim light. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. I could feel its eyes on me, though I couldn't see them. I could feel the weight of its gaze, cold and unrelenting. "You can't escape me," the voice whispered, a low, gravelly sound that sent a shiver down my spine. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. The shadow stepped forward, its long, dark form gliding across the floor like a spectre. It seemed to grow larger with every step, growing more solid, more real. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The figure reached the foot of my bed, its shadows stretching over me, and then it did something that made my heart stop. It reached out. Its hand, long and skeletal, hovered just above my chest, cold and heavy, as if it was going to suffocate me with its touch. I closed my eyes, preparing for whatever was coming, but then the door to my bedroom burst open. I heard footsteps, frantic ones, rushing toward me, and I looked up, expecting to see someone, anyone, there to help. But there was no one. The door was open, but the figure was gone. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't understand what was happening, but I knew one thing for certain. The shadow had followed me here, and it wasn't going to stop until it had me. Story, the lost child. It was a calm Sunday afternoon when I first saw the child. I had just moved to a quiet town on the outskirts of the city. Everything was peaceful here. the kind of place where everyone knows each other, where the most exciting event in the day is a local bake sale. It was perfect for someone like me, someone trying to escape the hustle and bustle of the city life. I had spent the day unpacking and getting familiar with my new home. My house was an old one, a large Victorian-style building, the kind you see in ghost stories. Creaky floorboards, antique furniture, and old dusty curtains that let in just enough light to give the house a strange, sepia-toned glow. The place had character, and I liked that, but there was something strange about it, a feeling, really. A strange sense of nostalgia, as if the house had a history I wasn't yet aware of. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to my imagination. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk around the town to get my bearings. The streets were lined with quaint, well-kept houses, and everyone seemed to be out and about, exchanging pleasantries. I passed an old church, a small park, and a few cozy little shops. It was all so picturesque, almost like something out of a movie. But then I came to a small alley that seemed to cut off from the main street. It was there that I saw the child. At first, I thought it was just a kid playing, maybe hiding behind a tree or darting in and out of the alley to avoid being caught. But something about the way the child stood there, facing the wall, gave me an uneasy feeling. The figure was too still, too quiet. I watched for a moment, waiting for the child to move, but it didn't. There was a sense of calm in the air, a stillness that didn't quite sit right. I approached cautiously, trying not to disturb the peacefulness of the moment. I called out gently, "Hey, are you lost?" The child didn't respond. I took a few more steps forward, my heart beginning to pound in my chest. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As I got closer, I noticed the child's pale skin and the strange, unnaturally long hair that seemed to hang in front of their face. The child was wearing an old-fashioned dress, almost like something from another time. It looked out of place for the modern world we lived in. "Are you okay?" I asked again, my voice trembling slightly. This time, the child slowly turned its head toward me. The face that I saw was pale, almost sickly white, with wide, empty eyes staring back at me. It was like the child had no expression, no joy, no sadness, just an emptiness that made my blood run cold. The child's lips parted, but no sound came out. It was as if they were trying to speak, but their voice was lost. I took another step back, my instincts telling me to leave, to get away from this strange encounter. But before I could turn and leave, the child raised a hand, pointing toward something in the distance. I followed the child's finger, and my stomach dropped. At the end of the alley, barely visible in the growing shadows of the evening, stood a house. It was an old house, one that looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. The windows were dark, the paint peeling off the walls. But what struck me the most was the feeling of dread that seemed to pour from it. It was like the house was alive with something dark, something watching me. When I turned back to ask the child who lived there, it was gone, vanished into thin air. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart racing in my chest, trying to process what had just happened. But before I could gather my thoughts, a cold wind picked up, sending a shiver down my spine. The alley was empty now, and the child had disappeared without a trace. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I didn't return to the alley the next day, or the day after that. I told myself I had imagined the whole thing, that it was just a strange encounter that my mind had made up. But deep down, I knew better. Something about that child, that house, was haunting me. As the days passed, I started to notice strange things happening around my house. At night, I would hear soft whispers from the walls, as if the house itself was trying to tell me something. The air would grow thick and heavy, and I would feel a presence behind me, watching me as I went about my day. One evening, after a particularly unsettling night, I decided to take another walk, this time to clear my mind. I couldn't shake the image of the child or the house. I had to know more. I made my way toward the alley again, this time with more purpose. The wind was quieter, and the evening felt colder. The shadows seemed to grow longer as I reached the end of the street where the alley began. When I turned the corner, I froze. The house was there again, the same dark, imposing figure at the end of the alley. But this time, it seemed closer. The air around it was charged, like static electricity hanging in the air. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I took a few steps forward, my legs shaking. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to turn back, to run, but something kept me moving forward. The closer I got, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was as if the house was pulling me in, like it was calling me. When I reached the front door, I could see that it was slightly ajar. A strange, soft light filtered through the cracks, illuminating the ground beneath it. I couldn't resist. I pushed the door open slowly, the old wood creaking on its hinges, and stepped inside. The interior was dim, filled with the smell of mold and decay. Dust hung in the air like fog, and the furniture was old, covered with white sheets. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the creaking of the floorboards under my feet. I moved through the house cautiously, drawn toward the back of the building. As I stepped into what looked like a small living room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the corner, was a mirror. But it wasn't like any mirror I had ever seen. The glass was cracked, the edges jagged, and the surface distorted. I approached it slowly, feeling my heart racing in my chest. As I looked into the reflection, I saw something that shouldn't have been there. The child. It was standing behind me in the mirror, just as it had been in the alley. Its hollow eyes stared at me, its pale face expressionless. The whispers began again, louder now, and I could feel the air grow colder. I turned quickly, but the child wasn't there. There was nothing in the room but the empty walls and the broken mirror, but I knew I wasn't alone. The child had been watching me. Story. The evil in the basement. I had always been skeptical of the paranormal. Ghost stories, creepy tales about haunted houses, all of it seemed like nothing more than urban legends to me. But that was before I moved into the old house on Maple Street. It wasn't a mansion, but it was big enough to feel intimidating. The house had been empty for years, and when I found it listed for rent, I thought it was the perfect opportunity for a fresh start. The price was too good to pass up, and the location was ideal. Quiet, secluded, just what I needed after a chaotic few months. From the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was off. The air felt heavy, thick, as if the house had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to come along. The floors creaked with every step I took, and the wallpaper in the hallway was peeling, revealing layers of faded color beneath it. The house seemed to be frozen in time, like a relic from a past I couldn't quite reach. But despite the strange feeling in the air, I dismissed it as nothing more than my nerves. The house had been abandoned for a while. It was only natural that it would feel a little eerie. I unpacked my things and settled in, trying to ignore the strange noises I occasionally heard at night. A tap here, a scrape there, but nothing I couldn't explain away. The house was old after all. It wasn't until the first night I ventured into the basement that everything changed. The door to the basement was tucked away behind the kitchen, hidden under a set of stairs that led down to the cold concrete floor. I'd never really given it much thought, but something about the door intrigued me. It was old and worn, the wood warped with age, but it was locked. The landlord had mentioned the basement wasn't in great condition, but I didn't think much of it at the time. That night, I found the key to the basement door hidden in the kitchen drawer. I figured it would be a good idea to check it out, maybe clean up the place down there. I had a feeling it would be a useful storage area, and after a few weeks of living in the house, I was starting to feel more comfortable, more at home. When I turned the key and opened the door, a blast of cold air rushed past me, causing me to shiver. The staircase leading down was dark, with only a dim light at the bottom, barely illuminating the way. I hesitated, my hand gripping the railing as I took a tentative step down. The air felt different down there, damp, heavy and thick with the smell of mildew. I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned to look around. The basement was large, much bigger than I had expected, and it was filled with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. But it wasn't the furniture that caught my attention, it was the corner of the room. A shadow seemed to be gathering there, darker than the rest of the basement, like something was lurking just out of sight. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the way the light hit the room. But the feeling in my chest, tight, suffocating, wouldn't go away. It felt like I wasn't alone. Then I heard it. A soft scratching sound, like something moving in the shadows, something small and quick. It was barely audible, but it sent a chill down my spine. I turned toward the sound, my heart racing, my breath shallow. Nothing. Just the dark corner, the same shadowy figure that had been there before. I tried to convince myself it was just a rodent, maybe a rat or something, but the scratching grew louder, more distinct. It was coming from the corner now, closer, almost as if whatever was there was moving toward me. I could feel my pulse thundering in my ears, my hands shaking as I took another step closer. My foot hit something on the floor, and I glanced down to see an old, broken chair, half buried in dust. But when I looked back up, the shadow was gone. I rushed back up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. My heart was still pounding as I leaned against the door, trying to calm myself. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to believe it, but I had felt it, something in the basement, something alive. The rest of the night was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Something was in that basement, and it was waiting. The days that followed were a blur of unease. I tried to ignore the feeling of dread that lingered whenever I thought about the basement. I avoided going down there, telling myself I was being irrational. After all, it was just an old house full of creaky floors and odd noises. It was nothing I couldn't handle. But every night, as darkness settled over the house, the strange sounds would return. The scratching, the soft thumping, the faint whispers that seemed to come from the walls. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, that it was nothing more than the wind, but the sounds became more frequent, more intense, as if something was trying to get my attention. And then, one night, I heard something else. A voice. It was faint at first, so faint I almost thought I imagined it. But then it grew louder, clearer, until it was unmistakable. "Help me." The voice was low, guttural, and full of pain. It was coming from the basement, echoing up the stairs and through the thin walls. I froze in place, my blood turning to ice. It wasn't the house settling, it wasn't the wind. It was something else, something alive. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen and made my way to the basement door, my heart racing. I stood there for a moment, frozen, listening to the sound. The voice. It was calling me, but I couldn't move. Something inside of me told me to turn around, to run, but my feet wouldn't obey. I had to know. I opened the door and descended into the basement once again, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The air was colder this time, the room darker, the shadows deeper. I felt as though the darkness itself was closing in around me. The voice called again. "Help me!" I followed the sound, my footsteps heavy in the silence. The air grew colder with every step, the temperature dropping so quickly it was almost unbearable. The voice was closer now, just around the corner, near the same spot where I had heard the scratching that night. I turned the corner, my flashlight trembling in my hand, and that's when I saw it. A figure, hunched over, its face hidden in shadow. Its skin was pale and gaunt, its hands twisted as if it had been left to rot. It slowly turned toward me, and I froze in place, unable to breathe. Its eyes, black, hollow, empty, locked onto mine. "You shouldn't have come down here," it whispered, its voice a rasping, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. Before I could react, the figure lunged at me, grabbing hold of my legs and pulling me toward the darkness. I screamed, kicking and struggling, but it was too strong. I could feel its cold breath on my skin, its nails digging into my flesh. In the darkness, I heard the whisper again. "You will never leave." Story. Lost in the dark. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. My friends and I had planned it for weeks, just a weekend getaway to a secluded forest, far away from the noise and chaos of the city. I'd always enjoyed hiking and the peacefulness of nature, and this trip was no different. Or at least, I thought it wouldn't be. We arrived at the campgrounds around late afternoon, the sun still high in the sky, and immediately started setting up our tents. The forest was beautiful, its towering trees casting long shadows across the ground, but the air had a strange heaviness to it, like the trees themselves were watching us. Still, I brushed off the unease, telling myself it was just the remoteness of the place. As the night fell, we lit a fire and gathered around it, laughing and sharing stories. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow on our faces as the darkened woods stretched around us. It felt safe here, too safe, perhaps, in the way only a secluded place can. There were no sounds of the outside world, no traffic, no noise except for the rustling of leaves in the wind. It was then that I first noticed it. At the edge of the campsite, barely visible through the trees, was a figure. At first, I thought it was one of my friends wandering off into the woods. But when I squinted into the darkness, I realized something was wrong. The figure was too still, too motionless. It stood there, just beyond the firelight, almost as if it were waiting for something. I hesitated. It was too far for me to make out any details, but I could feel my pulse quicken. I turned to my friends and pointed, but when they looked, the figure was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice tight with unease. "What?" one of my friends responded. "It's just the shadows, dude. You're imagining things." But I wasn't imagining it. I knew I wasn't. I shook it off, telling myself it was just the darkness playing tricks on me. But throughout the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. There were sounds in the forest, scratching noises, distant whispers, like something was moving just beyond the tree line. Every time I looked, the woods were silent again, but the feeling never left me. Around midnight, after our fire had died down, and we were ready to call it a night, I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. I walked a little further into the woods, away from the camp. The trees loomed overhead, their branches tangled in the wind, the moonlight filtering down in eerie beams. The silence was deafening. And then I heard it. A soft, almost inaudible whisper. It came from behind me, and when I turned around, there was nothing. No one. The forest was still, but the air felt thick, charged with something alive. My heart began to race, and I started to walk back toward the campsite, but then I heard it again. "Help!" The voice was faint, weak, as if it was calling out from deep within the woods, from far beyond the light of the camp. It wasn't one of my friends. It wasn't any voice I recognized. But it was a voice, clear as day, calling for help. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. "Hello!" I called out, my voice shaking. There was no answer, only the wind, and then that whisper again, closer this time. "Help me!" My legs went weak, and panic surged through me. I turned and bolted back to camp, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the fire pit, my friends were still gathered around, talking and laughing, completely oblivious to what had just happened. I didn't mention the voice. I didn't mention the figure. It was the kind of thing you didn't talk about at a campsite, not with friends who didn't believe in that sort of thing. I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the result of too much stress. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure again, standing just outside the circle of firelight, waiting. And every time I heard the wind rustling the trees, I heard the whisper. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I stayed up long after everyone else had fallen asleep, sitting by the dying embers of the fire, my eyes scanning the dark woods around me. It was then that I heard it again, the whisper. This time it wasn't distant, it wasn't faint, it was right behind me. "Help me!" I spun around, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. No one, just the empty woods, the shadows, and the rustling of leaves in the wind. My breath came in short gasps, and for a moment I thought I might be losing my mind. It was just a trick of the wind, right? I told myself that over and over again. But it didn't feel like the wind. It felt intentional. The next morning I tried to shake it off. I laughed about it with my friends, blaming it on the stress, the isolation. But deep down, I knew something had happened. I couldn't explain it, but the fear, the dread, was still clinging to me. Every step I took, I felt the weight of something watching me from the trees. We packed up the campsite and made our way back to the car, but as we walked, I noticed something strange. The trail we had taken into the woods didn't seem to match up with the one we had come down the night before. The trees, the landscape, everything looked different, distorted, like the forest had changed its shape overnight. I asked my friends if they noticed it, but they all shrugged it off, thinking it was just the angle or the shadows of the trees. But I knew. The forest had shifted. We were walking in circles, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being led somewhere we weren't supposed to be. It was only when we reached the clearing at the center of the woods that I realized how far off we had gone. The area was familiar, but it wasn't right. The ground was uneven, and the trees twisted in unnatural shapes, as if they had grown in ways they weren't meant to. In the middle of the clearing stood an old, decrepit cabin, one that I had never seen before. The door to the cabin creaked open, and I could hear the faint sound of someone inside. faint whispers, low and drawn out. The voice that called out for help. I stepped toward it, despite my instincts screaming at me to run, to leave the woods. But I couldn't stop myself. I reached for the door, my hand trembling as I touched the cold, splintered wood. And as I pushed the door open, I felt it, an overwhelming sense of dread, like something was reaching out to grab me. In the darkness beyond the door, I saw it. The figure. It was standing there, waiting for me, and in its hollow eyes, I saw what I had feared all along. The forest was alive,